Welcome to the Business of Thinking podcast. This is the place for high achievers who want more than motivation. They want mastery. Here we skip the surface level talk and go straight into the psychology of high performance.
Hello and welcome to the Business of Thinking. My name is Reid, and today I'm really pleased to be joined by Loretta Breuning, who is an expert on animal behavior and how it relates to human psychology. She's an author, she's a university professor, a coach, and many other things besides, but more on that later. Loretta, welcome.
Hi, nice to be here.
So tell us more about the work that you do and how you got into that.
Sure. Well, I was a college professor for 25 years in a different field, and I loved academic psychology my whole life because I saw it as like the answer to all of the problems. You know, everybody has that source of truth that they trust. And I started feeling like it didn't work. I noticed that my students were not motivated, that my colleagues thought, oh, it's fine, it doesn't matter, it's not our job to motivate them. And then I noticed that children of college professors didn't necessarily go down the right path. And my own children were very young at the time, but I could see how that could happen. And so I started doing my own research, and I wanted to learn more about the brain. And I would read one little mention of one animal fact and another little animal fact. And then I discovered a huge world of animal reality, both social behaviors that seemed so clearly iconic of our daily lives, and neurochemistry that clearly explained those behaviors.
Okay, and I know you set up an institute as well, the Institute of the Inner Mammal?
Yeah, the Inner Mammal Institute. So after I wrote a few books, and I also started collecting books because all of this information I found has just disappeared. It's no longer discussed in polite society, and it's not much on the internet, but it was abundant in research. So I collected all of the books that discuss it. So the Inner Mammal Institute,
about it before, didn't we? About so the information being hidden or disappearing. So it'd be good to talk about that. But please carry on. You're going to talk about the institute.
Oh yeah. So it's mostly to promote these books that I've written, which is quite a few now, and to give free resources to people who don't want to read the book, and to just make the world safe for the facts about dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin.
Fantastic. So it'd be good to delve into that in a little bit more detail shortly. But just rewinding a little bit, you said a lot of this information used to be readily available. It's not so much now. What happened there?
So when I say it was abundant, for example, if you watched a nature video, it would casually include the fact that mating behavior is extremely competitive, and animals compete tooth and nail to be the one that gets the mating opportunity. And how do you do that? Well, usually you need more muscle, and then you push your way to more food to get more muscle. And it sounds not nice and not the way we want to think that the world should operate and nature should operate. So there was this consensus in academic psychology to just come up with new facts, which anyone who studied in the past 20 years is surely aware that animals cooperate and they choose their leaders democratically, and women are in charge, and therefore everything runs smoothly. This is the belief. And part of what drove this consensus is that there was actual violence of animal rights activists against people who did research on live animals. And because most of this information comes from live animals, universities, to protect themselves, not only stopped doing the research, but withdrew prior research. And that's tragic. But I guess the biggest motivation for me in all of this was when I read that Mammals have social hierarchies in all of their groups, and they invest all of their energy after just basic survival into rising in the hierarchy. Now, no self-respecting academic wants to believe that this is true, but it was just a fact in every nature video and every research book for like 100 years.
Yeah, it doesn't suit the image that we like to have of ourselves, does it? And it's interesting as well. We like to think about small children as being pure and immune to these kinds of behaviours, and we tend to place the emphasis on society. But what you're saying here is that actually it's innate within us that we have this competitiveness.
Yes, and everyone can see it in children, but you're not supposed to see it, and you don't want to see it. And the same with animals, and the same with hunter-gatherer people, that we're supposed to think that they're pure and cooperative and communal. And in fact, they are continually fighting amongst themselves as well as with their neighbors.
Okay, interesting. And you've mentioned a few of the chemicals that sit behind some of these behaviors. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So I focus on 4 chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphin. Each one produces a good feeling, but it's a different good feeling. So we want all of them. And the reason for that is that each one motivates a specific type of survival behavior. And in the act of trying to feel good, we engage in these survival behaviors, despite the fact that our ancestors lived in quite a harsh world. And maybe they went out in the snow to get firewood, and dopamine made them feel good when they saw the firewood in the distance. And it's like, you know, that feeling of almost at a goal, and you feel good despite the fact that you do not yet have the warmth of the firewood. So it's the anticipation of meeting a need, which is dopamine. Right. And today, this has been distorted in infinite ways that we could talk about, but I think it's very important for people to see that in themselves and to understand it, that you're anticipating a reward when you feel joy and excitement, but it's a reward that was wired into you by the dopamine of your youth, which is why people find themselves possibly chasing things that, like, why am I doing this? But if you remember that moment when you were young and you got that thing and you're like, oh, it's a real physical pathway in your brain paved by your past dopamine.
So that's really interesting. So we can still be motivated by those things, even if those things no longer in reality have the same importance for us.
Yes, or you could find some variation of it. For example, a person who maybe when they were young, either they were a footballer and now they can't be a professional footballer, but they do things that are similar, that trigger a similar template in their brain, or a person who liked to shop when they were young and they do something similar today.
Interesting. So some of these chemicals that are at play, just think about our audience, primarily from a business background. How might some of these things play out within a business context?
Sure. I already mentioned competition. Simply, some people enjoy it and some people hate it. And that's why I would recommend to a person in a business context, and you've heard this before, is focus as much as you can on the things that you like, because they're very deeply wired. So if someone says we should all do X, that's because they're wired to like that, but that's not necessarily good advice for you. So I'll give you a simple example. I really don't like promotion. Conflict bothers me. And one thing I do, I love to write. A lot of people hate to write. So I focus on writing because I like that. But also, when I was in high school, I had actually a job as a graphic artist. And so I love to do graphics. And so when I want to write a book, I start by creating the cover. And I love that. So each person can focus on the things that they love and bring more dopamine to their task.
Interesting. I'm just thinking about the example you gave there. If there's a task that's challenging, I guess if we can feed in some of the elements that we've historically enjoyed, we can get a different spin on that, a different level of motivation.
Yes, exactly. And of course, there are going to be things that you don't enjoy. And the solution to that is to give yourself a reward afterward. And I know that sounds controversial, but let's say, for example, that you have a pressure filled meeting with a banker and you plan to do something after. Now that's fun. And then you're looking forward to that thing after. And it's like you wake up and it's like, oh, this is the day that I get to do this fun thing. Now, many people end up not doing this correctly because either they give themselves like a whole bottle of wine after, and then it becomes having the whole bottle of wine before the meeting with the banker rather than after. So
Really
one
common.
thing that's important, it's called habituation, which is that our brain easily habituates to whatever rewards we have, and it takes new and improved to excite us. So this is why it's a combination of rewards that you're already wired to like, but then it has to be a new level of that reward to spark your dopamine. And that's why we're always drawn toward excess. And it takes some conscious thought to broaden our rewards rather than just have excess of a particular one.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I guess if your reward is one that's not particularly healthy and you double down on that, that's obviously a slippery slope, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. But, you could plan a fishing trip after your meeting with the banker, and you will be excited about that whole endeavor. And some of the excitement will filter through to the meeting with the banker. But if you then take the fishing trip before the meeting with the banker and spend the whole time dreading the meeting, then you're going to lose the benefit of that sensation of reward.
Right, makes sense. And I'm just thinking about this in terms of leadership. I guess it's stating the obvious, but this sort of lends itself to really knowing your people, doesn't it? Knowing what motivates them, what sparks a reaction in them. So actually you can pitch work in a particular way that switches them on.
Yes, exactly. Because often we're given a lot of platitudes of what people like. But yeah, there are individual differences. But it's not always that easy to figure out because let's talk about the other two chemicals because they're more of the social chemicals. So serotonin is what people often hear about in the context of antidepressants. But the fact is that monkey research in the whole last half of the 20th century showed that monkeys are very competitive. They strive to rise in the troop. And each time a mammal encounters another mammal, they have a social dominance ritual, which is I make a comparison between me and you, and I decide that either I'm stronger than you or you're stronger than me, which is very significant because if a resource comes along, if you're stronger than me, you will bite me if I grab for that resource. So I want to protect myself, which is a threat chemical. Cortisol is released when I see that you're bigger than me. And that motivates me to pull back to protect myself. But now I still need to eat. So I look for an opportunity to be the stronger individual. And then my brain releases a little bit of serotonin. And that's a relaxing feeling that I could just let go and meet my needs. So needless to say, people like this feeling of I can just let go. I'm strong. I'm confident. I could do what I want. This is the feeling we're all looking for, but we are not designed to have it all the time because if we did, then we would act like jerks when bigger individuals were around and get ourselves into trouble.
Okay, that makes sense. And I guess that also plays out with humans, presumably, but I guess there's a lot more nuance in terms of bigger. It's not just about physicality.
Yes, well, people cannot admit to themselves that they're having this thought loop. And so, and also we have this whole infrastructure of people telling us to feel good all the time. So if you don't feel like the big monkey all the time, then you think I must have a disorder and somebody needs to fix me. But in fact, we're not meant to feel like the big monkey all the time because that would be unsafe and unrealistic. But we are meant to invest tremendous effort in the path toward that. But the catch-22 is that this chemical only is released in short spurts that are quickly metabolized. So I have this opportunity. I'm like a big shot. I get a round of applause. I get a little promotion. 2 days later, it's all gone, and I'm not back to who I was before, and I have to put in a lot of effort to get the next big thing. So if I don't know that's how my brain works, then I'm going to be in this real loop. So what's really important to know is that your serotonin is wired by your early experience, because that's when our neuroplasticity is higher and we build our myelinated pathways. So however I felt about dominant submission issues in my early years is what's driving me today. And when I say early years, there's a period before age 8, which builds the biggest foundation of your brain. So little kids, they're not so aware of these things. And yet, either you have one little kid who's constantly, let's say, punched by an older brother or bullied on the playground, but we also have mirror neurons that draw in our parents' feelings and resentments about their social position that we're exposed to all the time. I don't know about you, but I certainly was. And then in adolescence, we have another whole layer of this with so many different issues, somewhat individualized, but competition for mating opportunity is, needless to say, a critical one. And so those feelings are wired deeply. And what I think is so interesting is when you listen to interviews with celebrities, they will always tell you that, oh, they felt left out and unwanted when they were young. And you think, how is it that every single person, especially these, masters of the universe, felt that way when they were young? And it's because when you were young, you were by definition at the bottom of the social hierarchy and longing to rise and weak and frustrated. So this is the lens we bring to our business day, let's say.
Interesting. And a lot of this goes on people's awareness, doesn't it? So we play out these scenarios again and again, presumably.
Exactly.
Fascinating stuff. What else would be interesting for our audience?
So the next chemical is oxytocin. And this is another whole huge complication. So oxytocin has gotten more attention in recent years. I wrote my first book about this 15 years ago, and it's getting more attention, but it's all often in a false way filtered through the warm fuzzy paradigm. So oxytocin is widely represented as the love hormone or the bonding chemical. And that is an extreme oversimplification. So oxytocin, to put it very briefly, in the animal world, oxytocin is the good feeling that you can let down your guard because you have protection from others. So you could call this cooperation and community and solidarity, but the reality is that animals are not motivated by serving the community. Animals are motivated by getting protection from others. Now, in the modern human world, if you are of service, then you are more likely to get protection from others when you need it. But the bottom line is that your brain is always making that calculation. And many people end up resentful because they feel like they're doing a lot for others and therefore they do not feel, and yet they are not getting protection from others in exchange. So what's really important is you have to be honest with yourself that getting the protection is what makes you feel good. The service is only like the dopamine steps toward getting what you want, but we're not allowed to admit that to ourselves in polite society. And in addition, that your oxytocin is wired by your own early experience. So when you were young and you felt like you were not getting protection from others and you were sort of resentful that you were giving more than you were receiving, many people wire that in and then they ruin their lives with this sort of resentment neural pathway. And as you said, awareness is a huge step forward.
It's fascinating stuff. But, in the therapy room, this is exactly what I come across all the time. People feeling that they're not getting their fair share, feeling their boundaries are
Yep.
being compromised.
Yep.
And it's all the stuff that you're talking about.
Yes. And when you watch nature videos and you see that animals have these exact same things and they're always negotiating and weighing, and you could celebrate that our brain is designed to deal with these situations and that the chemicals exist to motivate action, to say, I have to get protection from others rather than being alone in the wilderness. But on the other hand, the threat chemical we need to keep in mind that I'm not actually about to get eaten by a predator, even though I feel that way the minute I fail to get from someone else what I had been hoping for.
Right, right. And I'm just thinking about the world in which we live today. Obviously, most people live fast, busy lives. Does that lead to the risk that actually we don't tap into these communications from the body, that we could be feeling these things but not aware of it?
Well, I don't think really anyone is aware of it because we have two separate brains. The chemicals are controlled by what's called the limbic system, which is that core part of our brain. You may have seen like the amygdala, hippocampus, etc.,
Yes. Yeah.
which is strictly nonverbal. It's the same in animals, and it controls the chemicals. Now, your cortex, the human neocortex, which is unique to humans, it controls the verbal and the abstracting, the future-oriented part of your brain, and it is not aware at all of what the chemical part of your brain is doing. So no one is aware of what they're doing. And the verbal part of your brain is always struggling to understand, like, why do I feel this way? And it comes up with whatever theories are popular in the time period you're living in. So 2,000 years ago, people said, oh, I feel bad. The gods must be giving me a warning that something is going to go wrong with the universe. Whereas today, people say, I feel bad. It must be that my political opponents have ruined the world and people need to vote my way in order for me to be happy. So, and 100 years ago, it was something else, So
Yeah.
you have to, and that's why, like, I spent like so many years reading about the brain to really accept that your verbal brain does not control your happy chemicals, and you can't talk your way into it really without really accepting what a mammal is looking for, and that a mammal has survival impulses that do not reflect what society tells us we should be thinking.
Interesting. And you mentioned very early on that when a lot of these theories were being talked about previously, there were a lot of negative reactions to it. What kind of reactions do you get when you talk about this stuff today?
Oh, very good question. So I get good reactions from individuals and no reaction from polite society. To explain that, the individuals that I hear from, they tell me that they're like addicts to reading personal development books. And they say that they have studied this personal development field for years and didn't really gel until they read my book. My introductory book is called Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Dopamine, Serotonin, Oxytocin, and Endorphin Levels. And this is a 10th anniversary edition of the book is coming out this year with a new chapter that I'm writing right now. And they are like so thrilled to read this. And I'm gratified by getting these letters. And like you said about awareness, is like you just relax when you know the facts. However, from any organized institution, if they would acknowledge what I'm saying, then it ruins their whole raison d'etre, whether it's the medicalized worldview or the victim of injustice worldview. My theory ruins it. So, but I don't attack them openly, so they don't attack me openly. They just ignore me.
Okay, well that's something anyway. But it's true, isn't it? So many people build a status or an identity around a particular theory, and I guess a lot of people are uncomfortable when those theories are challenged.
Yes, exactly. And also, quite sadly, there are many mothers of children with a quote unquote diagnosis And their whole life has been invested in this, like, my baby has this diagnosis. And see, the complication is that I'm always talking about how we're wired by early experience. And that appears to put terrible pressure on parents, that you feel like if anything you do wrong, your child is going to suffer for their whole life. But that motivates you to rescue your child from any moment of distress or unhappiness without awareness that that rescuing from distress becomes a problem in itself. And so that's where our culture is today. And my own children are young parents of young ones. And so I really, sympathize with this problem, and they don't want to hear from me. Anyone who expresses distress, it's always assumed that the distress is real rather than a bid for social dominance. And if you, in some way, in any way at all, suggest that they're just trying to get power, that you are just shunned and people are enraged, that you must take another person's explosion with indignance as legitimate. And so we have a world full of people whose primary skill is exploding with indignance. And I truly saw that as a college professor for 25 years, because students are no longer expected to do the work. So exploding with indignance becomes your primary skill. I know that sounds extreme, but it's alas.
No, I've certainly seen some of that. It's almost this sort of rights without responsibilities, isn't it? It's I don't have to contribute anything.
Yeah, exactly. And much of the human resource material is written from this perspective. Makes you wonder whether human resource managers have ever managed anything. It's sort of like you hear, like in politics, that a person who's good at campaigning is going to win, but being good at campaigning is not necessarily the same as
not
being
the same skills. Yeah.
So,
and I was just thinking about the example you gave about small children. When they're in distress. Actually, a little bit of distress within reason is actually good in terms of building resilience, isn't it? You build your own resources.
Yes, exactly. And if your primary resource is to call for help, or if you are, it's even worse when it's not even a real task, but she took my toy. No, he took my toy. No, and they're fighting over toys. And whoever makes the winning appeal to authority, that becomes their primary skill. And they just constantly focus on the conflict over toys. And in the past, maybe parents were leaving them to work it out themselves, which was not always perfect because there was some good deal of cruelty going on. But, the going to the other extreme is not good either. And again, you could see this in the workplace, which is quite unfortunate,
Yeah, definitely. I know I've worked in some big organizations where you've got very capable grown adults, and the structure of the organization almost sort of makes them into children, because it tries to helicopter in, fix everything, and people lose their autonomy without necessarily realizing it.
Yes. So what's so important and struck me so much, social comparison is a constant activity of the mammal brain. So like I said, every time one monkey runs into another monkey, it immediately does a social comparison. Are you stronger than me, or is I stronger? Because then I know how to act in order to be safe. And people are constantly making social comparisons, and society is blamed for this. Might blame the boss, I might blame the company, but the bottom line is, if somebody else gets something that I don't get, then I'm going to be indignant about it. But if they worked for it and I didn't work for it, and then I want it too, then other people are going to say, oh, everybody gets a trophy, whether you work or not. So once again, it's like this social comparison impulse is deeply wired in our youth, and we need to start becoming more aware that we're doing it internally instead of projecting it onto others.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I was just thinking about, as you were speaking there, I think about sort of how a lot of schools now deal with things like sports day. Everybody gets a prize. You get a prize for turning up, not necessarily based on performance. And from what you're saying, it's almost sort of going against the grain of how we're designed to be.
Yes, and also if we both get a trophy, but I think that your trophy is slightly better than mine, But here's the thing. If you still kick 3 goals and I kick no goals, then I still may have feelings about my lack of skills in this area. And I'm still challenged to manage those feelings. So this is the goal of parenting, is to learn to manage our feelings so that we put our effort into developing our skills rather than sulking. And maybe I will never kick as many goals as you, but I still need to feel a sense of confidence about our next step. And in my books, I explain this all from an animal perspective, because animals, like when a lion hunts, they fail in 95% of the chases, but they still keep trying because they're hungry. And hunger is what drives nature. But in the modern world, we're not hungry. And that's, part of the complication. But also, when a lion fails, it uses up its reserve tank of energy, like it spent all its energy. So if you make bad decisions about which gazelle you run after, and then your energy is used up, so you can't go after this other gazelle. So our brain is designed to make careful decisions about how we spend our energy. So when you try really hard on something and you fail, you feel terrible, because that's our brain trying to conserve our energy so we have it left when a good gazelle comes along. And that's why we feel so frustrated when we try and fail. And again, it's useful to know that.
That's really interesting. You hear quite a lot these days about the growth mindset, don't you? Which really, I guess, is a counter to that. How do we learn from mistakes? But what you're saying there is fundamentally that the brain's designed to move us away from those situations, to be more discriminatory in terms of how we deal with things.
Yeah. So here's how it works. If I'm chasing a gazelle and I get really close, but the gazelle starts to pull away, so I have to make a decision. Do I keep chasing it or not? And this is a terrible decision to have to make, because after I invested all his energy, if I pull the plug, that's terrible and I'm starving. But if I keep chasing the gazelle and it already got away, then I'm going to die of starvation if I keep chasing gazelles that are going away. So you could see how clearly this is a business decision. Like if you're investing money in an endeavor that's not doing well, should you pull the plug or not? So from a lion's perspective, the only thing that gets the lion to stop the chase is a bigger cortisol surge than the hunger. So I already desperately want that gazelle because I'm starving, but I even more need to stop that bad investment in order to, yes, okay? And this is the same with mating. It's so funny when they study chimpanzees. If a chimpanzee has its heart set on a certain prospect and then it fails, and if you fail and you chase the same prospect forever, your genes will not survive. So a broken heart is that huge cortisol surge that trains you to give up, because giving up is an effective and necessary step to take on a new prospect.
That's fascinating. It's essentially cutting your losses, isn't it? And you see this in lots of businesses. They get, people get emotionally attached to a decision, even if the fundamentals tell you it's not the right decision to persist with. So really interesting to hear that.
Yeah, and it's so painful and so hard, but then I keep telling myself, animals make these decisions, so I guess I have to trust my gut because animals make these decisions. But of course, you don't, like you said, the fundamentals, you have to analyze the fundamentals, but we need to know that the final decision is made by your emotional brain. And you need to know that your emotional brain was wired in your childhood So you need to be aware of the childhood wiring to know your biases.
Yeah. So self-awareness is a big part of it, isn't it? And you mentioned training the brain as being, one of the titles of one of your books. What would be some useful ways in which people listening could start to retrain their brains to work better for them, given some of the things you've mentioned?
Sure. So it takes a huge amount of repetition to retrain your brain after childhood. So the simple example is that children appear to learn languages easily, but once you try to learn a language in adulthood, people know that it takes so much work that most people don't. So in the same way, most people don't retrain their emotional wiring, which they built in childhood seemingly without effort. So if you think of what would it take to learn a language in adulthood, and maybe you take on small goals, do a little bit every day, and repeat things over and over, step by step. So that's a simple way of looking at an emotional project that you would try to retrain. So the classic example, if you have some really bad situation like alcoholism, for example, and a person tries to train all at once, but you could kind of think about it in steps. But first, a person turns to alcohol because it's the reward that they learned when they were young. So what would be some other ways that I could reward myself so that giving up alcohol doesn't feel like just pure loss? So I use alcohol to reward myself in X, Y, and Z situations, to understand those situations and then say, how could I bring a different kind of reward, a different way of getting that reward in that situation? And then give yourself extra rewards of something else in those situations and repeat it so that you build a new neural pathway that when you're in that situation, you're actually not just feeling like you're missing something, but you have a new life.
Mm-hmm. It makes a lot of sense. And I guess it's not the approach that a lot of people take. It's that a lot of people go the cold turkey. So I'm just going to cut that thing out. What it sounds like you're suggesting, it's repetition, but it's also about incremental changes as well.
Yeah. So whether cold turkey means you still have some alcohol but less or not, I'm not taking a position on that because I know that people in this field are, very, and also, whether a person is trying, like whether they're addicted to pills or gambling, there's all kinds of problems you might have to go cold turkey. But the bottom line is the cold turkey is you can't change your mindset overnight. And a lot of people expect to change their mindset overnight. And they try to do that by adopting someone else's mindset who tells you, oh, this is the way you should think. And you have to explore, think of it as literally the foundation of your brain is the thought loops you learned when you were young. What was defined as good, what was defined as bad, and really understand that. And then find a way of tailoring that. So the classic example, of course, is that people socialized around this bad habit and that you can still socialize, but you need to define socializing in another way. But another big bad habit, apart from addictions and abuse, is what I consider is the habit of being over-involved in controlling other people, which ends up with, I can't be happy unless you do what I think you should do.
Yeah.
And it's really just as much of an addiction. And if you have this problem yourself, or if you have this problem on your staff, it's much harder to change in someone else than it's again, I need to change you. And that's a huge issue in our world. And so that my second book is about that. It's called The Science of Positivity, How to Stop Negative Thought Patterns by Changing Your Brain Chemistry. People have this belief that the world has gone wrong and I can't be happy unless the world is fixed. And the world
and I guess that's really externalizing your locus of control, isn't it? And it's not learning to tolerate your own prevailing emotions and the chemicals, presumably.
Yes, and learning how you're creating those emotions and creating something else, despite the fact that other people are never going to change. And other people think they're right, and they're just as sure that they're right as you are.
Yeah, I know a few of those people. Loretta, this has been really fascinating. I've really enjoyed our conversation. If people want to find out more about your work, where can they go?
InnerMammalInstitute.org, InnerMammalInstitute.org. And I have a free 5-day happy chemical jumpstart, which is 1 email a day for 5 days on each of 5 chemicals. And it's, and there's lots of videos and podcasts on my site and details about specific problem-solving challenges like the ones we talked about.
Brilliant. We'll share that link. Loretta, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great chatting with you. We'd love to have you on again at some time in the future.
Thank you. It's been fun. Bye-bye.
This is the business of thinking. Mastery doesn't end here. See you in the next episode.